Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Water Forum. Water is and will always be and must be an important topic because water security is linked to our food security and it also determines the state of our economy. Here on the show, we will share stories to build a body of knowledge through shared experiences. Through information sharing, we create water awareness and education. We strive to be informative and factual because facts are our friends, in the words of Dr. Anthony Turton. So join the conversation. Today on the Water Forum, we will be talking to Dr. Anthony Turton and more specifically about the alliance between OUTA and Water Shortage South Africa with regards to the call for an independent water regulator. Our guests always welcome your comments. So if you are watching us live, please do share your comments. Tell us where in the world you are watching from. It's always great to know where people are watching the show from. Please do share the broadcast. And if you're watching the show on the replay, also leave your comments and questions. We will always come back to those in the comment. This broadcast is brought to you today by BLiveMedia. So my guest today is Dr. Anthony Turton. He is a trained scientist specializing in water resource management as a strategic issue. He has a robust publication record, and Dr. Turton also is a sought-after professional speaker, consultant, and a writer. I also want to ask you to, if you are joining us today and you want us to see your comments live, please ensure that you're watching the show. The show is live on various Facebook pages. But if you want us to be able to see your comments live while we are online now, please check that you're watching from the Facebook page. So it'll be www.facebook.com/WaterForumSA. If you're watching the broadcast from another page, if it's not WaterForumSA, we cannot see your comments. So welcome to the show, Dr. Anthony Turton. Anthony, welcome.
Good day to you. Good to be on your show. Thank you very much.
Great to have you back. It's been a while. Today we're talking about the alliance between OUTA and Water Shortage South Africa. They recently issued a press statement calling for an independent water regulator. You're no stranger to the show. People know you. But perhaps before we start, could you clarify what your relationship is between Water Shortage South Africa and why you support the call for a water regulator?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. Water Shortage South Africa approached me towards the end of last year and asked me if I was willing to support them in any way, and I believe that what they're doing is the correct thing. They're a good, robust NGO, and I felt that this would be a charitable enterprise for me to support. So I support them as an advisor. I don't have any executive role within the organization, but I'm more than happy to adopt them, if you like, as my charity of choice. They have linked up with OUTA, which is a very, very well-run, highly focused, very successful NGO that shifted away from opposition to e-tolling to now focusing more on issues about tax abuse. So there's a natural synergy between those two organizations, and I'm very comfortable to work with them. But then I don't have any executive role in either, and I also am not a spokesperson for either.
Right. So and you're not on their payroll. So your views are entirely your own, and it's an independent view.
Yes, I certainly don't receive money from any of these people. I serve on the boards of various other companies, etc. But I don't get paid for what I'm saying at all. No.
100%. So let's dive into the conversation. So there was a press conference last week with OUTA and Water Shortage South Africa making a joint statement calling for an independent water regulator. Now, the Department of Water and Sanitation has responded a few days later acknowledging that call for an independent water regulator, and their response was by saying that the Department of Water and Sanitation is in the process of establishing its own water resources and services authority, value chain and services master plan. Is that a little bit like saying that the department is to determine and be its own judge and jury?
Well, let us unpack that. So, firstly, we can anticipate that government would say that. After all, government is about power. Why would power in any form voluntarily allow itself to be diluted out? They wouldn't like it. They wouldn't like it. So that is entirely a logical response and the correct response. If I was advising government, that's exactly what I would advise them to do. However, having said that, we have a situation whereby the Department of Water and Sanitation is increasingly embroiled in all sorts of financial mismanagement. It's under investigation by SCOPA. There are all sorts of criminal investigations coming out there. And the bottom line is that the department is financially bankrupt to the tune of billions of rand. It is a den of corruption. There's all sorts of major projects that are being farmed out from the department, all of large magnitudes of money. And there's no way that they will ever be able to get access to any private sector capital, if that's what they want, unless they clean up their act. So we can certainly expect that elements within the government that have been feeding at the trough for a period of time are going to push back on this idea. We can absolutely expect that. But on the other hand, we can also expect, and I think we should, as a point of good faith, except that the President Cyril Ramaphosa, has made statements to the effect that he intends to clean out the corruption. He's currently in Davos, where he's been under enormous amount of pressure for just this. He's recently sent emissaries out to the four corners of the globe to try and raise capital to kickstart the South African economy. They've all come back with similar messages that the world is ready to invest, but we've got to get the corruption thing sorted out. So in other words, I think the timing is right now. And those within government that are clean and that are willing to cooperate, I think will be people that we should work with. Those that are not clean, that are going to seek to undermine, and then we simply have to deal with them one by one. But the important thing is, it's not for me to determine this. It's a logical outcome of a country in distress, a government approaching a fiscal cliff, revenue basis from taxes decreasing to the point that there is very little money in the fiscus even to pay average civil servant their monthly salary, let alone raising the 1 trillion rand that we need to get the water sector to the kind of standard that is needed to create full employment in the country or in the economy. So in other words, I'm very comfortable that they did respond. And I'm looking forward to engage with them. I will say one more thing. It's not really for civil society to call on for the establishment of independent regulator. That should in fact be part and parcel of the legislation that establishes each government department. And therefore, there are vestiges of this oversight that already exist within the department. So it's a question of finding those, strengthening them, putting the necessary resources in, cleaning up the reporting lines, and more importantly, where there is some legislative tweaking needed, to then start getting consensus on the need for some legal reform to actually define the role and function of this organ of state. Whether it's a Chapter 9 institution or whatever, I don't quite know what it's going to be, but at least you have some kind of independent, legally defendable role for it to play.
Anthony, can you expand a little bit on why we need such an independent body? Why do we need an independent regulator in the water sector? What will its functions be, and how will it benefit the water sector and us as ordinary South Africans?
Yes, I think the easiest way to do that is to just share a story with you, and narratives tell all the bits and pieces of information that you need. It became extremely obvious to me during the last election that water had been highly politicized, and in fact, the whole elections had been highly politicized. But in particular, what alarmed me was that Minister Nomvula Mokonyane, who was Minister of Water and Sanitation, was also the head of the ANC's task team for the election. So she was driving the election process within the ANC from the Thule House. But she was also the Minister of Water Affairs. And I've got a vibrant network of people within the department that keep feeding me day-to-day information of what's going on there. And I started getting a lot of independent people telling me that they felt extremely uncomfortable by a number of things that were happening within the department. The one was that there was an active recruitment drive to get card-carrying members of the ANC, and indeed there was pressure being put on some of the civil servants, the highly qualified, technically competent civil servants who had always remained politically neutral, and there was pressure being exerted on them to join the party. And there were veiled threats being made that if they don't join the party, it might not be good for their career going forward, etc., etc. They didn't want to make a fuss about it because they felt it would damage their career going forward. So they chose to rather just do nothing about it. There was this undercurrent there. Then the next thing that happened alarmed me very seriously, because instruction was then given by Nomvula in her capacity as Minister of Water Affairs to the functionaries of the department to not act in any way on any of the media reports about sewage failures taking place in different municipalities, for fear that these might become political footballs in the ensuing election. Now, this, of course, is illegal, because you have a government department that is legally and constitutionally responsible for the water resources of the country, and you have a minister that's legally responsible for protecting not the card-carrying members of the party, but society at large.
So there was a conflict of interest there.
There's an absolute conflict of interest, absolute conflict of interest that takes place. You had a situation now where you had a spin-off effect from taking place. And the spin-off was very profound, because you had dysfunctional municipalities that were mostly the home of the ruling party at the time, who were allowed to get deeper and deeper into debt with things like Eskom, with things like their bulk service providers, Rand Water, Ngani Water, Mhlatu's Water, etc. So they got deeper and deeper into debt, which then started putting more and more pressure on those water boards who were simply unable to fund any future infrastructure going forward. So you started getting the ripple effect, like when you throw a stone on the pond, you get these little ripples going out from the center. And it was at that point in time that I became acutely aware of the fact that there's a real deep conflict of interest taking place here. And it's in our collective best interest as society, not to necessarily point fingers of blame, but just to try and clean up these structural weaknesses, to start re-establishing the rule of law in the water sector, to start holding people accountable, legally accountable for the jobs that they're given in terms of the Constitution. And this whole Water Lines initiative that we launched about trying to hold someone legally accountable is part and parcel of that journey. But the bottom line is that we have hard evidence now manifesting in reports from Scopa of massive over-expenditure, massive corruption and collusion, and to the tune of billions of rand, to the extent that systems have failed. And it all comes down to the fact that the department, that there's a conflict of interest within the Department of Water Affairs. The minister or the senior functionaries cannot be players and referees in the same game. It's as simple as that.
So in determining the functions of a water regulator, are we looking at a body of professionals?
Well, I wouldn't like to prescribe how the regulator should function or should look. I think what should happen now is that the statement of intent has been put out. Both major parties, the two NGOs and government, have responded. They both sort of stake their claim into this space going forward. Behind the scenes, there's been a lot of lobbying that most people are unaware of. So I'm aware of the fact that there is quite a significant body of support for this initiative from large segments of the economy. So over the next 2 years, there will be a process unleashed. That process will be one of engagement. As to who's going to lead the engagement, I don't know. Ideally speaking, there would be a cooperative agreement between OUTA, Water Shortage South Africa, and the government, and they would get involved jointly in engaging the stakeholders. If it breaks down for whatever reason, then of course decisions have to be made about how to take it forward. I think ultimately form will follow function, and the function will be determined by the major players in the sector. So here we're talking about mining, for example. We're talking about big industrial users. We're talking about large property owners, people that own shopping complexes and retail, major retail estates, etc. People that own large housing estates, healthcare professiononals. So whoever wants to come to this party is welcome. It will be an open process. And at the end of the day, I would suggest that we take evidence or inputs from all these different parties, and we then compare that to international best practice. And one of the best examples of international best practice is in fact from the state of Victoria in Australia, where you have a highly functional regulator. I met with a regulator when I was in Melbourne last year. The regulator is highly feared and also highly respected by all players. And I think it was in meeting that regulator that I realized the role the valuable role that such an entity can play. So I think we'll take evidence, we'll take some input from other parts of the world where they've also got a similar challenge. But at the end of the day, consider it to be a work in progress without any predetermined end objective other than establishing a functioning, depoliticized, technically competent regulatory authority that frees up all the conflict of interests and that makes the water sector investable to whoever, whether it's the World Bank that wants to put money in, whether it's private capital, whatever capital, whether it's taxpayers' money that goes in there, just to ensure that the money that's put in the water sector is used for the purpose for which it was put there, and it doesn't end up in a private offshore bank account by some corrupt official.
So for the ordinary Joe, that is now watching this broadcast, the independent water regulator is to be something like what NERSA is to the energy sector, an independent body that will have a say in the determination of how the water sector is run. And the NERSA for the water sector, whatever name that will end up being, is a body that will have public participation involvement.
Ideally, yes, it's something like that. But of course, NERSA is also highly contested. The decisions made by any regulator is always contested. It deals with really important issues like the cost of energy and what is the tariff that's going to be charged, etc., etc. So these are very important factors, and that is why you have to have sober, technically competent people that are not politically, not overtly politically connected, or at least represent a broad spectrum of political interests. And if they come from any specific sector, which is very possible, they have to at least make a declaration to that extent up front. But then you know who you're dealing with. And ideally, you would have a representative in there, for example, from the big bulk water users, maybe someone from mining, maybe someone from healthcare, etc. So it would represent the broad interests of society, but very importantly, it has to be funded in such a way that future career progression and stuff like that cannot become a tool to force that regulator or that individual to make a decision one way or the other. So that's really what it's about. But the actual structure, it's premature to talk about how that would look at this point in time.
So I think basically all we want to establish and say is that there is a need for an independent regulator in South Africa, that we basically are at a stalemate almost. And if we don't move forward towards getting a water regulator, our department or our water system is just going to continue falling further and further apart, because that's all it's been doing in the last couple of months.
Yes, indeed. I can state categorically that South Africa is a water-constrained economy. We know this for a fact. I can also state categorically that South Africa is capital constrained. Just last week, I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago, certainly in the last 2 weeks, there was a media report that came out stating that, shock and horror, South Africa is the third largest exporter of foreign direct investment, FDI. So South Africa, as a relatively small global player, stands up there amongst the biggest of exporting local capital. So in other words, we have got a net outflow of capital from South Africa to the extent that we're in the top 3 in the world. Now other countries in that same space include Venezuela. Okay, so Venezuela, which is, we know what's happening there at the moment. It's not a very healthy place. So how can we move forward? How can we actually create a politically stable, socially cohesive country in which every citizen can meet their reasonable aspirations for a better future? So if we don't get this right, and this is an important thing that I'm going to say, if we don't get this right, then I'm afraid we are heading for anarchy and chaos. And anarchy and chaos, I don't want to be a prophet of doom. And the reason why I've supported this initiative is to be the exact opposite of the prophet of doom, because it doesn't have to be that way. We can make a difference. We can still turn the ship around. So I'd rather be on the side of positive things that need to be done, that must be done, that can be done, that should be done. And let's put our collective energies into that without pointing fingers, without getting into the bun fight of who said what to who. That's irrelevant at this point in time. But if we get this right, the upside is that South Africa sits on the cusp of major investment. Just this last week, I was involved in a meeting. It's a confidential meeting. I can't give too much detail about it. But a significant investor, significant foreign investor, has said they are willing to make a substantial sum of capital available for investment into the water sector, provided that there are bankable projects coming up, meaning that the governance structures must be in place. And end of last year, I had a meeting with a major institutional investor that manages people's pension funds and what have you. They pledged a significant amount of money. They were talking about 1 billion South African rand that was available. The other investors are talking about 1 billion US between those two. And I'm aware of the creation of other private equity funds that are moving into that space. So I can state without any fear of contradiction that there's a significant amount of capital out there. It's been withheld, it's been disinvested, it's been moved offshore to protect it because of all of the things going on with expropriation, like compensation, etc. So the capital's there, but it can't find a home until things are sorted out, until there's certainty. Let's call it policy certainty. So I've got absolutely no question of doubt that if we get policy certainty, and here I think the challenge is to President Cyril Ramaphosa as the leader of the country. Let's assume that he goes through a successful next election. Let's almost hope that he goes through a successful next election, and that he comes through with a solid majority, that he can then consolidate his position, clean out all of the rat nests within his own organization, rat nests of corruption, get rid of those. And now with confidence, start saying, how do we grow the economy? And then we start talking about a new thing now, and that is about water as an economic enabler. And I've spoken to you about this before. We need about R1 trillion of investment into the water sector, which is entirely possible if we get the governance structures right. So the regulator is one of those governance structures. And that, the light at the end of the tunnel there is, well, let's unlock R1 trillion. Let's create the Marshall Plan in the water sector. Let's start digging up the roads and putting fiber optics in while we're putting new water pipes in, etc. Let's fix up all the 824 sewage works, most of which are dysfunctional. Let's clean them up to the next, to the 21st century standard. And let's do the same with 1,020 odd water treatment plants, your potable water plants. Let's do all of that. It's a logical part of using water as an economic enabler. Then we're making the pie bigger for everybody, and instead of squabbling over a diminishing pie, like hyenas and jackals, we are now making the pie bigger for everybody. Now we're talking radical economic transformation. Now we're talking realistic chances of sustainable, let's call it a sustainable revolution, that we can start embracing the fourth industrial revolution with confidence, etc. So I fully put my hat in that ring, and absolutely I will go as far as we have to go on that journey.
Anthony, thanks very much. I think it's good news to hear that it's not all doom and gloom. It's good to know that funds, I mean, despite the fact that the water sector is in a lot of trouble, it's good to know that funds are available and that the funds will be unlocked if there is policy certainty. And I want to thank you very much for clarifying what the call for a water regulator, I want to restate, an independent water regulator is for South Africa and what that will mean for us. So thank you very much.
It's a pleasure indeed. Thank you for engaging with me. And I think we need to carry on this conversation because we're going to have a lot of honest conversations coming out of this. Beyond the water regulator itself, we then have to have other honest conversations about the upskilling of people in the water sector so that they don't lose their jobs, that they can become more productive, and that's a very important thing. The other thing, of course, is about introducing new technologies into the water sector, bringing us up to 21st century standards, creating opportunities around that. There's a huge thing around that. And then, of course, the whole thing about desalination. Do we desalinate? Don't we desalinate? What are the pros? What are the cons? How does this fit into a big, grand national water vision? And then, of course, we've got the other thing, aquifer storage and recovery, groundwater management in a rapidly changing world where climate can no longer be predicted with any degree of certainty. So there's a lot of conversations, but we've got to just establish the groundwork with honest people of integrity, open to all kinds of inputs. We've got to create an inclusive basket in the middle that we can get more and more people to buy into that middle narrative, if you like. So increasingly marginalized, highly vocal extremists on both wings.
Anthony, I couldn't agree with you more. It's definitely a conversation that must continue. There's so many various facets, as you rightly mentioned, about the water conversation that we need to have. And so I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your input as always. And thank you for your independent voice. Thank you for your strong voice in water. And we look forward to welcoming you back again soon.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye for now.